So I've been playing around with the JRU loop and its alt reset firmware. In the manual, it describes an effect of granular looping that you can achieve with this alternate firmware. And in my most recent video, I shared some sounds that were me getting towards that idea, but never quite reaching it. I think this is an experience that we often have patching, where we have some idea that we encounter, we want to achieve that in a patch, and we get close to it, but we just can't figure it out. And then as soon as we step away for a moment, we realize we were that close. We were so close to getting it, and there was just one thing that our brain wasn't quite putting together. And that was the experience that I had with this idea of granular looping. And so coming back to it, I thought this might be a nice opportunity to attempt a patch from scratch and talk about the process of creating this granular loop effect while running through it one patch cable at a time. So let's start patching. I'm going to start by taking a sound source, in this case, the pendulum, into the loop. And I'm going to take the output out of the case. And listening to that. I'm going to grab a bit of this as a loop. I'm listening to that now. Perfect. So let's granularize our tape loop. The alt firmware for the loop repurposes the dry-wet CV input as a trigger to restart the tape loop. And when we restart the tape loop very quickly over and over, we create little moments of sound that repeat. And when we do this fast enough, these granules become a continuous sound that we perceive. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to take the pulse output of the pendulum's second oscillator, and I'm actually going to run it through an attenuator here so that I can control the on and off of our retriggering. I'm going to run that into the dry-wet input, and now listen as I start to re-trigger the tape loop over and over again. And as I make these faster, we have that granular sound. Now, as I adjust the playhead, we're going to move through the tape loop and hear a different segment of it that we're repeating. I'm also going to slow down the tape head a little bit just to pitch this down. And now our granules are happening very regularly, but if we start to introduce some variance in the frequency of our pulses here by bringing in the rungler as a modulator on the second oscillator of the pendulum, we're changing how long the loop plays before we reset, which creates effectively these granules of different size. We can slow this down. speed it up a little bit. Add some more variation. And scrubbing through the tape head, as I said before, lets us find different moments in this loop. And right now, I'm looking for a nice boundary between two distinct moments in the tape loop so that we can really hear that variation in the length of our different granules. The next thing that we can do is start to introduce some variance in the speed of our tape loop. And this will shift those granules around in pitch and also even more affect the amount of sound that is played in any particular granule. I'm going to take the Rungler as our source of controlled chaos here, put it into an attenuator. I'm going to need a longer cable. And run from here into the speed control. Now as I turn this up, we'll start to re-pitch these granules as well. And now I'm going to turn off both the trigger and the speed modulation just to remind us what our original sound was that we were dealing with here. And you can hear we're really getting this nice cut-up granular sound by just working with a trigger in the micro sound range and having some nice controlled modulation on the speed input. I'm going to turn the speed down and just look through here for some interesting little glitch sounds at low speed on the tape loop. And so right now, the Rungler is changing its value every time that the oscillator 2 completes a cycle. And so our random values and our granules are tied together very closely. The Benjamin V2 has a clock input so that I can decouple this relationship. And I want to hear what this sounds like with the Rungler changing values at a slower pace, closer to a traditional sequence, while we're still getting these grains of sound at a fast pace. I'm going to use a channel of the Sport Modulator 2 as my clock input now for the pendulum. And so you can hear, now we're treating this little loop like a sound source that we can pitch around and sequence. And as I search through the playhead, we'll have different little granules of sound that we're building our sound out of. I'm going to turn up the speed again on the loop. And so now we've actually built something that sounds a lot like our initial sequence, but it's actually all coming from just a little snippet of our loop here. And we can create related variations by moving through the playhead now. And I think that creating these sequences on top of granules from different spots in the playhead creates really interesting relationships that we can cycle through. I think that's about everything that I wanted to cover with this. Hopefully it's a clear way of seeing this granular effect that I was going for and how to produce it with the loop. I'm gonna play us out. I'm just gonna explore a little bit, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a nice day.